The core feeling that I think we need to counter right now is a feeling of powerlessness. People feel powerless because it's been a while since we've really used our power. But we have a lot of power as people. We have got to show people that we have power again.
My name is Gibrán Rivera. I'm a facilitator, and this is my podcast. I started this podcast as my way of dealing with the existential question of our time. The fact that the species is at a choice point. Is this going to be our evolutionary crash or our evolutionary leap? This podcast is my way of inviting you into a conversation with remarkable leaders who are devoting their lives to the evolution of consciousness and culture. In this episode, I want to introduce you to my friend Keya Chatterjee. She's the executive director of the Climate Action Network. Keya is a mother, an author, and a passionate climate leader of remarkable integrity. Here, we talk about what it takes to build powerful movements and the way she's going about doing this work right now. Listen in for clear lessons on equity, inclusion, the possibility of true democracy, and the work that we have to do if we're really going to meet the climate crisis. I can't wait to hear what you think. Enjoy. Hi, Keya. Thank you for agreeing to being on the podcast. I'm excited to be talking to you.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And there's all kinds of things that I want to make sure we get to talk about. But as the executive director of the U.S. Climate Action Network, I am wondering, what is the project that is capturing your imagination right now?
The thing that I'm most excited about that I'm working on right now is something called a front-loading process. And it comes from this momentum school of thinking. They're an organization, they run trainings. And we are doing a front-loading process, which means that we've gathered 12 USDN members from all over the country, very diverse group of folks to think about in the next 5 years, how do we really ramp up our ability to grow and deploy civil disobedience so that we can actually get action at the scale of the crisis and end the crisis part of this. So end the climate crisis and win a justice-centered Green New Deal. So it's a really fun process. We're meeting together for 2-day sessions, 6 2-day sessions. It's a great group of people, and it's really nice to start from that frame of what are we actually going to do to win, and do we think the things we're coming up with are really at the scale of what's needed, given what we can learn from the history of civil rights movements and nonviolent movements, and given the situation we find ourselves in the US today.
And who are the people that are gathering in these sessions to prepare for this?
It's a great group of people. So they're all members of U.S. Climate Action Network, which is our network of lots of climate-focused groups. So it's folks ranging from the executive director of Green Latinos, Mark Magana, to faith leaders like Reverend Woodbury in South Carolina, moms like Sharice Udell, who runs Utah Clean Air Moms, Elizabeth Lee, who's United Methodist Women. I'm leaving off some people here. Kara, who's she's with American Nurses for a Healthy Environment. So lots of different disciplines, lots of really unique and different lived experiences. So we have people who survived Sandy, like Allison Arnn from the Nutrition Organizing Project, and people who've been really involved in indigenous fights to protect sovereign territory, like Jacob Johns, who's an indigenous organizer out in Eastern Washington, and who's also an artist. So it's a diverse skill set, it's a diverse group of people, but we all love each other a lot. I feel kind of bad that I just rattled off some, but not all of us. it's like the yeah, I feel a little bad, but you get the sense of who the team is.
That sounds awesome. Maybe you can share a word with our listeners about what is the gathering call of the U.S. Climate Action Network. Like, who belong? What are the type of people that belong to that? And I know you said names, and I can infer already, but how would you say it in the words of the executive director of this network?
Yeah, so it's the 30th anniversary of U.S. Climate Action Network this year, and that membership has changed a lot in that 30 years. And so it's now, I would say, it's 180 groups, and it's two people, up to one or two people from each of those groups, and these are individuals within organizations who really value building relationships and building trust with people who are different from them, who have different lived experiences, have different theories of change, different lenses through which they come to the climate crisis. Some come to the climate crisis not because they wanted to, but because their communities were being displaced and attacked. Some come to the climate crisis because they learned about it in school. It's a really diverse range of people, but what they have in common is they want to take the time and effort to build relationships with people who are different from them, but who share this common goal of ending the climate crisis.
Got you. And so when you say different, for example, one thing that comes to mind right away is, and I know there's been some beautiful headway on this front, but historically, certainly when we were coming up until relatively recently, the climate movement has been kind of a caricature of it has been as a very white, sometimes privileged elite movement. The people that you've mentioned, the groups that you've mentioned, don't sound like they'd be part of that traditional, that at least imagine traditional form. When you say different, are these folks a part of it? These old school environmentalists, for lack of a better word?
Yeah. So we have our membership includes, the big green nonprofits whose membership are largely middle class white environmentalists. So National Wildlife Federation or NRDC, EDF, all of those, Sierra Club, all of those groups are members of USCAN, but they're not leaders of USCAN. And so what we find over and over again is that what our members value, the value proposition that we bring as a network, is the centering of leaders of color and those who are most affected by the impacts of climate change, the impacts of fossil fuels, and the impacts of the transition we need to make as a society. And so the way we make our decisions are based in transparency and even radical transparency and democracy. So we use ranked choice voting each year to decide on our work plan for the next 12 months. And we actually just came from our annual meeting uh, where members just voted on the work plan for the next 12 months. And we vote in such a way that whether you're, Huda Alkaf, a very active, beloved member of USCAN, who's a volunteer who runs Green Muslims of Wisconsin, or whether you are coming from a massive institution like the Sierra Club or Oxfam America, very big organizations that are members, you get the same vote within the U.S. Climate Action Network. Everyone gets the same vote. And we have many more members from the smaller organizations than the bigger organizations. So the result of our votes is reflected, it doesn't exclude the voices of the bigger organizations, but it doesn't give them any more weight than anyone else's voice, which we think is the right weighting for now. We definitely periodically get feedback. It's funny because when we started this new strategic plan and this new way of working that really centered justice and equity and diversity and inclusion, got lots of pushback from the big green organizations. Like, is that really fair? Because we're a huge organization and we only get to send 2 people and we only get this one measly vote out of like 180. Does that seem fair? And now we get actually pushed back in the opposite direction. If we're really going to center leaders of color, then why do those big greens even have a vote? um,
That's powerful.
so it's really shifted the way even our membership thinks about who we are. Certainly, it's shifted a lot in the last 30 years, but even in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot of shift in who our membership is, and in how we make sure that we're giving them voice.
That sounds really powerful, and I have seen that shift. I have seen that growing awareness too. I uh, I remember some years back being part of the People's Climate March, and I know that in my own imagination and that of many others, that felt like a big moment that centered these communities. What was the role of US Can in that?
So we sit on what's called the mobilization support team for the People's Climate Movement, and so uh, I can speak to like what I've been at USCAN for 5 years. So I and another staff member sit on that table. Sit at a lot of tables, and it's it's tables where our members want us to sit, and our reason for sitting at them is because our members want us to, and to bring transparency to our membership about what's going on. And so we sit at ones that are centering leaders of color the way that PCM does. We also sit at ones that don't center leaders of color as much, like the Green Group. But I think at any given moment, we usually sit at 5 or 6 tables where we're at some kind of like leadership table, and we're trying to make sure that all of our members can be plugged in and have transparency and can see what's happening. Um, uh, for us, it's really mainly about being there for our membership.
Got you. Got you. I understand. And I remember, Keya, you and I met through your participation in the Young Climate Leaders Network, which I had the privilege to facilitate. And I believe you came into your role while we were in that fellowship.
Yeah, so I came into this role because I was feeling a little bit of dissonance in the with between my own values and where I was at the time. And Colette Pichon Battle, who I believe you have had on this podcast, and we were in the same program together, and she was on the board of U.S. Climate Action Network, and she convinced me to apply for this position. She's still on the board, so yeah, that it is absolutely through our connection that I came to be in this position.
I love it because that speaks to something that is closest to my heart, which is the power of relationships and of networks of bringing the right people together, which you've alluded to multiple times in this brief part of the conversation. You've said you love each other, you care about building relationships. Can you tell me how you all do that? Like, how do you make sure that there's time and care given to that? People don't just fall into relationship. It has to
Yeah.
be nurtured somehow.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it is that we create a container where people can speak their minds and have honest conversations, where we can assume best intentions, but also own the impact of what we're saying and doing, and that it's okay to do that, and it's okay to have hard conversations. So we don't avoid those hard conversations because it's the vulnerability in those conversations, that brings about the relationship and the trust. And so we physically get together once a year, which really helps because that's where you have the Prince themed karaoke that everyone laughs about for years, and it really helps with the relationship building to be together once a year in person. But then we maintain those relationships through the work plans that our membership votes on. And so our framework for thinking about it is like a pyramid where we invest a lot in connecting members to each other and building those relationships. And then once the connections are established, we feel like we can align our membership, and we do that through democratic and transparent processes through voting, through a series of consensus processes, and only then do we really try to produce at scale. And that really operates in a mini way, like any meeting we have follows that connect, align, produce sequence, but also over the course of the year, over the course of a 5-year strategy, we try to make sure we're continually investing in the base of that pyramid, that's going to hold us together, which is the connections and the relationships. And that kind of stuff, like we don't even know half of the benefits of the relationships that people make and build upon at our annual meeting each year. We just see like tiny bits of it that members are telling us. Like we know that the work plan gets voted on and that gets advanced, and we know all that, but there's so many things that projects that get launched, ideas that get brewed, collaborations that begin when you bring amazing people together, and you build a container that's really that really is around us healing as individuals and being able to move that forward.
This is really beautiful, Keya, because as again, as you know, this is my bread and butter and what I've devoted my life to. So I'm gonna dig in a little bit more, just because I know a lot of my listeners are interested in what it takes to bring diverse groups of people together. How how long is this annual gathering, and how is it? Who facilitates it? Do you have a facilitation team? Like, what are some of the things that happen? Did you just kind of organically let karaoke happen, and therefore people connect? What does healing look like in this kind of a space? I'm just curious as to what is the form that it takes. Mainly because again, this is what I spend my days doing, and I know people listening are curious about it.
Yeah. So that was a lot of questions. We don't have an external facilitation team, and we generally don't have external people at our meetings at all. And so the people who are there are our members, and our members make this happen. We are a very small core team. And so our members are facilitating breakout sessions. We as staff are facilitating a lot of the sessions that are in the main room, but really our members are taking notes, are facilitating, are doing the bulk of the work to pull this off. And all the ideas around connection also come from our membership. So the karaoke started organically after we had finished a session and we were chanting "I believe that we will win," and somehow somebody decided to change it into "I believe that we will sing," and then they all went karaoke, and then we formalized it, and we found we did it. We do a lot of so we set the agenda through a lot of member input for the meeting each year, and then we have a webinar where we talked about like what's the most important thing for you, and it was just so funny in the webinar for this annual meeting. Everybody was like, "We need smoke machines and a karaoke machine," and I was just like, "Is this really the most important thing right now?" Because and the photo booth and the smoke machine, it sounds silly that we have to invest in these things as a movement, but we do. We're human beings.
Yes,
and
yes.
and singing is a part of being human, and singing together is really an incredible connection, just like dancing together or making funny faces in a photo booth together. And then the healing part, we I think, well, honestly, I do think part of the singing and dancing is healing, but we also have healing centers at for the first time we had that at our annual meeting this year. So we had rooms where people could just take a break, do whatever their own practice or their own faith tradition leads them to do. But then we also did hire some folks to provide, 15-minute massages and some acupuncture, because we feel like our members are out there on the front lines all day, every day, organizing. They are really constantly putting others before themselves. And this is a rare occasion each year to come together and talk about really hard things with others who are in similar positions all over the country. It's really hard right now. Just on Monday in Washington, D.C., like half of the city was underwater. Today, New Orleans is underwater between the fires and the floods, and it's an and the deep levels of racial oppression in our society that are so systemic that our members are experiencing day in and day out, it's just a lot. So we feel like we're going to have these really hard conversations that are, that are really about pretty bad things that are coming our way and that are happening in this country, then we have to also provide space for people to take a step back and take care of themselves. And it's really important to us that we all take care of ourselves, and our members are given the space to take care of themselves.
That sounds beautifully human. It sounds like I can't even, well, even in some of the other tables in which you and I have interacted, I'm not going to call anyone out right now, but yeah, the very idea of having a conversation that was personal or kind of self-revealing a part of yourself, uh, even then seemed, and I'm not talking about the Young Climate Leaders Network, even then seemed like something people were resisting, right? It was like it's a movement where like policy is so important that it can attract people that are much more comfortable in their head and their intellect, not in the dancing and the singing and the feeling. And so it sounds like something really special that you're doing together.
Yeah, I think it is. And there was one question I didn't answer that you asked, which is how long the meeting is.
Yeah.
So we have so for us it's a longer meeting for staff. So we have like a staff retreat, and then we have our board meeting, and then our members generally come on a Tuesday. So we have a pre-meeting for leaders of color. And then we usually have some action to support a member in the place where we are. So we were just in Minnesota, so we had an action opposing the Line 3 pipeline, and delivered letters from U.S. CAN membership to the entity, the government entity that will be deciding on the permit for that. And then we begin on a Wednesday afternoon and end on a Friday afternoon. So
Okay.
it's not a terribly long meeting. And the core part of the meeting. So basically, we get together on Wednesday and we do scene setting, reminding ourselves of what's going on. We usually talk about the top things that our members have voted on as a priority. On Thursday, we break out into a lot of sessions to cover all the topics our members want to vote on. And we vote on Thursday. And then on Friday, we have the first meeting of the 4 action teams that we vote on Thursday.
Got you. And let's say I'm listening to somebody's listening to us right now, and they're like, "Wait a minute, this is the kind of climate movement that I want to be a part of. This is something that I want to plug into." What would they do?
So
What should they do?
yeah, so our members are organizations. So that is the way we
Right.
are a bit exclusive. So organizations are members. So 501c3s or C4s or C5s in the legal code can join US CAN if that is of interest. But I think more importantly for individuals who want to engage, I would say it's just to be a joiner in general. The issue we work on really is about our ability to provide to have a stable enough climate so that people will have food and water. It's a very fundamental issue, and it's a big issue. And if you're in community, only then can you really absorb it and be able to talk about it, is my feeling. It's just hard by yourself. And so whatever organization you join, you can go to usclimatenetwork.org and you can see a list of 180 groups there. There's one for everyone. There's one for every geography. There's one for every identity. There's what, there's so many, there's one for different professions even. There's so many lenses through which you can join. But I would say as an individual, the most important thing is to join some community, because this is hard work and it's so much easier when you're doing it in a loving community.
I am so resonating with you right now on this, Kaya. Um, one of the I'm getting that echo again. One of the questions that come up for me. Well, I'll start with a comment. I am reading a beautiful book. One of those books that it's not just a good one. It's one that will impact you for the next decade or the rest of your life. It's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and the central premise of it is that we live in a culture that does not know uh, how to grieve. right? We don't have grieving rituals. We turn away from grief as something that is to be done individually. And grief is in some ways the great leveler, right? We're all bound to experience it. And one of the premises is that we have not been able to contend with the climate crisis because we are not having been able to contend with the grief that our bodies, even if our minds don't feel it, our bodies are animals. Like, we know that we are living through the sixth great extinction, not because we're reading it on the headlines every day, though we are, right? But because we have a sense of it as biological entities that are of this earth. And multiple times you've referred to the fact that we're dealing with something hard, and to the power of community and of love in facing it. I'm wondering what else you can share about what you've learned, about what it means to be a human being in this context, in these days, to face that reality right now.
Yeah, I actually read that book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, right after Trump was elected. I
Perfect.
found it really useful for the time as well. And I think that part of what we all need to grieve for and then come together and work for again is um, not just our planet and Mother Earth, but also our belief, to the extent any of us had it, that there was a common humanity and a system that would respond in a caring
Wow.
manner. And I think that the grief is really deep because it is yes for for us as part of a natural world, but it's also for our belief in ourselves. People. I mean, the core feeling that I think we need to counter right now is a feeling of powerlessness,
Right.
and and people feel powerless because it's been a while since we've really used our power. But we have a lot of power as people. So for me, I also am a person who channels my grief very quickly into action. uh, and doing, just go throwing myself into something as a coping mechanism. Which, but for me, it's like we have got to show people that we have power again, and we do have power as people. Like there's no place where you can run any over any people, like where you can rule over people if you don't have the people with you. And there's more people who share a sense of justice than don't in this country and in this world. Still, I still believe that. And as people, we have incredible sources of power because we pay our taxes still, and that supports what they're doing. We go to work and school, we go buy things all the time, and the minute we stop doing that, even for a little while, that they can't keep doing perpetrating their injustices. Whether you're talking about any of the injustices happening right now, there's so many, it becomes overwhelming to even recount them. But children in concentration camps being ripped from their parents, uh, you know, uh, totally credible rape accusations against the president of the United States that are not being taken seriously. Every day living within a system that targets Black men and incarcerates Black men. It's like this like world of injustices, including an inability to act on climate change. But we actually have an incredible ability to turn that around. And I think one of the things for me that's been really helpful is is really digging into the political theories that help me understand what's going on right now, that tell me, like, okay, well, right now we're being run by an alliance that includes oligarchs and warmongering imperialists and these quote unquote family values folks that don't like women or anyone in the LGBTQI community, or and white nationalists. And that is this alliance. And this started from 1980 under Reagan and has lasted until today. But there was another alliance before that was workers
That's
and
right.
environmentalists and the peace movement and the women's rights movement. And we can get that alignment back, but I don't think it's going to happen that easily. But like the more I dig into really understanding what got us here, I find that it helps me in the grief process of like it just helps me understand more why is all this terrible stuff happening, which then helps me figure out how to cope with that internally, but also externally what we'll need to do to get beyond it.
That is so powerful and so clear, Keya. Thank you so much for it. And yeah, for the passion with which you live. A question. I'm gonna geek out with you here for a second, right? Because I've looked at the similar pattern, right? And one of the things I've observed, and I welcome another perspective, is that alliance that was an alliance of the one that you mentioned, peace and justice, civil rights, and that was taken over. Now, at that time, it still seemed like the way to organize was to run the state, right? To like take over the state as kind of the levers of power. And obviously, right now we're seeing the levers of state power in the wrong hands. So to say that that doesn't matter would be silly, it would be ignorant. At the same time, I keep coming up against that vehicle, the limitations of that vehicle as a tool for the kind of social transformation that we're going for, right? So I keep talking about the need to evolve consciousness itself, culture itself, how we choose to be together, what it is that we value as human beings so that we cannot so easily be turned into consumers, right? Rather than human people. How do you contend with that tension?
I guess I would say two things. One is that our leaders who will get us out of this will not be people who are running for office and elected leaders. And I don't really believe movement leaders ever have been. You know, like Martin Luther King or Gandhi, these are not people who are running for office. These are people who led movements. And I think we're looking to the wrong place sometimes for leadership. We're looking for who's the person who's going to run in the primary, who's going to inspire me. And sure, sometimes that happens, but more likely not. More likely, it's actually a movement leader who's going to be the person who gives us the inspiration that enables us to change hearts and minds over time and reach people. That said, I actually maybe in a different place from you, where I believe we do need to govern. When I think about who runs this country, and then I think about the members of the U.S. Climate Action Network, I can tell you who I would rather have running the country, which is maybe not. I mean, that's an understatement, right? That's not really fair because I would literally rather have almost anyone running the country. But I think my point is that I know that we as movement leaders know how to run things and know how to run things better. And so I think that we should be governing and we should be aspiring to run this country in a different way, in a humane way. I also recognize that, like, the current party structure and all of that really isn't a place where we're going to look to for leaders. We have to make ourselves the people who are running, and we have to put ourselves in charge, and that feels like icky to people sometimes. But I don't see another way, and we're so. I would also say that I'm in a place where I don't actually think that that's a path to creating the change we need. So yes, I think we should govern, but I think that honestly we will need pretty large scale civil disobedience to get us to jolt us off of the track we are on towards fascism and autocracy and injustice. And so I don't think just like working within the confines of this political and economic system that has built in so much oppression is going to get us there. I don't think we can just work within that system. I think we have to jolt the system off the tracks. And then absolutely, I think we should be vying for power.
Yeah. No, I want to be clear. I think we are aligned there. I think we need to run the country, and I think I'm exactly where you are. I think we need the right people in making policy. Policy matters. And we gotta enact policy at such a scale that at this point only the state and the most powerful state in the world could do it. So I'm right there with you. I just often worry about the political imagination of people being too limited to that particular pathway, and it certainly doesn't seem like that's where you are. Uh, I did want to ask you because it's come up multiple times, and I made a note here. It sounds like with this momentum work, and now you just mentioned civil disobedience again, and we mentioned the civil rights movement as an example. Uh, tell me more about that. That certainly seems to be the only path. Tell me how you're thinking about it. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think can happen, must happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, we use the Bill Moyer framework of the roles of activists a lot. I don't know if you've seen that, but we say a lot, like we need all the roles of activists. We need the anchors, like the Pope who will protect us as activists from charges of extremism, and we need the reformers who get whatever we can out of the current political and economic system, and we need the rebels who say no and deploy nonviolent direct action and bring our issue into the spotlight when everyone is ignoring us. And we need the change agents, the people who have that imagination you were talking about, the people who can imagine a different political and economic system, one that wouldn't have caused the underlying crisis that led to the climate crisis to begin with. And so I think we need all of it. I will say, for me personally, just a lot of my energy and um, excitement is coming from thinking about how we can give people a sense of agency and power again. And that's why I'm really, really excited about this, because I'm just thinking about, like, how can we help people see their power, use their power? How can we build leadership in our community and train people so that everyone's not starting from scratch, but really help people understand what are the tools that have been used in civil disobedience and nonviolent movements all over the world throughout history. Like, this is not something that has never been done before. Human beings have found themselves in worse positions than this and gotten out of it using nonviolent direct action. And so we should be building massive training programs and letting people step into their leadership and really be able to express that leadership in their own communities so that they can feel that they have power again and shake off that
Yes.
feeling of powerlessness. So that, to me, is why I'm so excited about this project, because we're trying to create that training program and that container that would enable people to shake off that feeling of powerlessness that I know so many people are feeling right
That sounds
now.
beautiful, and it resonates deeply. I know that for me, when I look at the what I consider the crisis of the culture at large, right? Before we even talk about any of this, I witnessed a crisis of meaning and a crisis of connection, right? Like the large meta stories that brought us together, whether those be the mainline faith traditions in many ways, right? Are not drawing people into their churches, temples, mosques at the same level. And by the way, I'm not in any way devaluing those of us that still find a lot of meaning there. Uh, or the grandiose story of our country as the beacon on a hill, right? So these meta stories have come into question. They don't have the same power, so we're left with a crisis of meaning that only then kind of narrows us into uh, meaning in identity, for example, as the one way to find something. And then we also have a crisis of connection, right? We have a very affluent culture that have a loneliness as a crisis, right? That has addiction as a crisis, right? Has anxiety and depression as a crisis because we are not in community with each other, like you're saying. So when I think about the climate crisis, I often think of it, talk about meaning, talk about a big thing for us to come together around. Talk about a great opportunity to build community around, to build connection around. So there seems to be a powerful opportunity here that you seem to be pointing towards. Where I get what needs to happen. Where are the kind of points of light? What have you learned turns people on, right? Like, what has to get somebody out of what some might have called the consensus trance, right, of the culture? We're in this consensus trance, kind of looking the other way as the waters keep rising. Like, where are you seeing, what turns somebody on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ability to be in community and express joy turns people
Hmm.
on. And so I've been really, this is another connection through the Young Climate Leaders Network. But one of our colleagues there, Will Lawrence, and other friends, we're good friends, and they're also members of U.S. Climate Action Network at Sunrise Movement, I think have done an amazing job of showing how you can bring people together in community that's around singing and joy. And yes, it's around sit-ins, but if you see any video footage of them sitting in, they're all telling their stories. They're singing. They're in community together. They're learning more about each other every day they're together. They're breaking bread together all the time. I went down to the Democratic National Committee office, and they occupied the steps of the office for 48 hours, demanding a climate debate. And when I went there, they create a fun experience, right? Like everyone was sitting outside, watching the debates outside, cheering, and some people had their sleeping bags. They were camping there, and people were coming by and dropping off food and provisions, and there were songs, and it really is, I think, an exciting movement, the Sunrise Movement, and really what inspired us to start this front loading process, because they had also done a similar front loading process. But for me, that's a place where I really see how we can get beyond the crises that you outlined. I see a path forward through the work of the Sunrise Movement, and that they've identified some of these core things that we need as people.
That is awesome. And it's curious that Will comes up again, because I haven't spoken to Will since we were together. And just this Monday, we did a call for something called the Better Men Project. And Will showed up. And he actually showed up because somebody else invited him. And I know you and I not because of me, right? Not because he was on my list. And I'm just appreciating the power of networks. I know that you and I have talked extensively about that, right? And yeah, here we are, like making these points of reference. This investments that we've made in bringing even just 25 people together to build deep relationship over a period of time really seems to, well, when they're the right people, it seems to have powerful reverberations. I'm really happy to hear you bring Will up and to bring joy up. And I think, what I'm going to tell you, Keya, in hearing you talk and a couple of other people recently, it is making me more hopeful. It is making me aware that there are people focused on the human part, on connection, on story sharing, on joy. I think before the call, you heard me complain a little bit about something I bring up a lot on the podcast when I'm talking to brilliant people like you, people that care. Uh, as a facilitator, I'm often wrestling with what seems like the centering of a victim identity in some places. I know, for example, that I find the trauma discourse to be really important and a really powerful move forward because it humanizes us. It acknowledges our pain, right? It says, I have been hurt in my life. I'm in a community that has been hurt. There's been generational pain that we got to work through here. And I think of this as a net positive. But I also find a pattern of kind of wanting to rock our trauma, right? Kind of leveraging it in ways that feel less than healthy. That we're not trying to work through it, but we kind of embed it in our identity, and that often, as a facilitator, often yield some frustration for me because it feels like it keeps us from doing the deep and intense work that we're here to do. There's a kind of fragility implied in it. And what you're speaking to seems to be the opposite, right? It seems to be joy. It seems to be singing together. It seems to be storytelling and relationship and love. You did mention the need for healing, but it doesn't seem to be centered in the same. It doesn't seem like it's no, healing is key, but it doesn't seem like this victim thing is at the heart of your work. I'm wondering if you can help me think through this, but given the people that you're in relationship with, I'm sure you've seen at least some of the pattern
Yeah.
in the spaces that you're in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it is, in fact, important. And I say this as a person who is not the recipient of anti Black racism, but I know that it is anti Black racism that uh, that incarcerated and kills so many Black people, and that brought us Trump. Like that was their plan. And so I do feel like we have to own the impact of our actions, and I think that having that agreement within our network that we will own the impact of our words and our actions, and we will, take the time to understand white supremacy and how the system has built up that way, enables us to have some honest conversations that then we can get to the point of saying, yes, and need to tone down the call out culture, particularly to people who are young, particularly towards people who are very new to the movement and are trying to join. If we want to keep the movement small, then it's great to to call people out and make sure that people are perfect all the time. If we want to grow, then we have to educate people. Um, and so I think there's a balance and a tension between those two things. Like, we have to own the impact of what we're doing. There are things that we do. Those of us that carry privilege, and all of us are somewhere in the middle of the privilege ladder, right? But like I I have to take responsibility for the impact I'm having at all times. At the same time, I think that there's a way you can interact with somebody that takes that as a moment to educate instead of as a moment to call out, and that really happens when you have actual relationships.
Right.
And it can't happen without relationships. So for me, all these things are very intertwined. The ability to really address any trauma that that exists and is being caused in a moment depends on the relationship with that person. If you have a relationship, then you can have that conversation. If you don't have a relationship, it's really hard to have that conversation. And so for me, it comes back to relationships. I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, I think you did. I think you did. I think it's something we're all wrestling with, and I think the spirit and open mindedness that you're bringing to it, and heart. Actually, you're saying, hey, whatever the trauma is, because I don't think it's. I don't think it's just anti-blackness that I was referring to here. Uh, Whatever the trauma is, we need to acknowledge it. We need to hold it. We need to kind of feel the impact of history in the current moment, and yeah, what does it mean to it's hard to keep blaming people for not knowing what they don't know, right? Like if they haven't learned it yet, right? Uh,
yeah, I think that we have a problem with call out culture in our movement, and again, particularly towards young people and people who are new to the movement, it turns people off, and it's not, and it's often not, in a kind and loving spirit. And so I think
right,
if we can turn it around and come from a kind and loving pace, again, even while we understand impact, not only like the pre-existing trauma, but the trauma usually in those situations that has just been caused in that moment. Usually there's something that has happened in that moment, that has resurfaced trauma. So we need to all acknowledge that impact, but we need to stop yelling at young people. They're not going to join our movement if we yell at them.
got it. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. I I'm looking at the time, and I know that part of what I wanted to get to here was some of the the choices that you've made in your life that I think are a very interesting part of your story. Uh, I when I met you, you weren't taking airplanes. Is that still true?
I very rarely, so I limit my flights to one per year maximum.
Wow,
So we keep a very tight carbon budget. Uh,
that's a bit, and you've been doing that for a good while.
yeah, yeah, it's
Tell me about that. It sounds really challenging to be somebody in your role in a national network doing that. Yeah, and I know I'm on a plane all the time, which is a little embarrassing when I'm talking to you. But I'm curious as to what can you tell me about those choices? How are you living within within this kind of tight carbon budget?
yeah. I mean, so for what started it honestly was just a fight with my utility. So I got into a fight with the utility. They were overcharging me, and I cut them off. So that was what actually started me down this path. I was kind of already primed to want to get off of their dirty product, but their terrible customer service drove me there. But for a lot of the things that I do, whether it's like getting around with, I happen to live in an urban place, so I can get around with a bicycle and walking and public transportation. I have that privilege. Like I can eat vegetarian food. Like it's easy for me. I never really even liked meat. I think that some of the things are just things I can do that some of the things genuinely like, you know, are I think most people would consider very hard. Like we don't use heating or air conditioning. But part of that is also the beauty of that is that like we spend a lot more time in public places, at libraries, at public pools. We spend a lot more time in community. We know so many more of our neighbors through all of the practices that I'm talking about because I don't have a car I jump into and drive away. I talk to my neighbors because I'm walking somewhere. I'm in a human scale, because I am not traveling so much is another reason I get to form community. Like that's a privilege to be able to form community and get to go on vacation in places that are near to me, and that are really a part of our community. So I would say the same for using extremely limited electricity. But for me, fundamentally, it's just I really struggle when I feel a dissonance between uh, what I want uh, for this world and what I'm living. And that dissonance has led me to change jobs a bunch of times and certainly leads to a lot of you know, the things that I do. And a lot of it is also honestly because I find it really fun. I mean, like, and I derive a great deal of joy from it. So like last night in our neighborhood, H Street Northeast in DC, we had a power outage. I felt terrible for everyone suffering and I walked outside and I told everyone I felt bad for them. But we have solar panels and batteries, which again is a great privilege. But so our power didn't go out, so I was
Great.
so excited. I was like giddy excited. I was like, oh my god, I can't believe this is happening. The power had gone out.
That's
And so,
hilarious.
it's the same thing like riding a bike down a hill to get home. Like that is a joyous thing. I don't know when the last time was you rode a bike down a hill, but it is a beautiful thing to do.
I love it. Yes,
It.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I feel bad for people who, like who don't have the options that I have to do any of those things. But I would say fundamentally they bring me joy and they help me feel at peace, that I'm living in the future that I know we can all live in. I know we can be in a place where right now, fossil fuel companies and oligarchs have made it so we must use dirty products in order to participate in the economy. I know we can have a world where that's not the case. Know that
Right.
that's possible. There's no reason why buying an automobile in an urban center should be your only ticket to participating in the economy. Everyone who wants to should get to have that feeling of riding a bike down a hill, and they don't right now. And that's by design.
That's
And
right.
so for me, it's like an act of joy and rebellion when I
I love
those
it.
personal decisions. And I'm kind of like working out the kinks by doing it early as well. Somebody's got to work out the kinks because I tend to do things like that like first and then figure out like, oh, this is really hard without a protected bike lane. And then I go get the protected bike lane.
That's beautiful, Kay, and you're absolutely right. It takes people like you to make other people like me, kind of pause and be like, "Am I doing enough? Is there more of a stretch?" There is something inspiring in the integrity involved in making those choices. The word in Spanish that we have is consecuente. And, when people talk about somebody like Che Guevara, the word consecuente keeps coming up, right? Because he tried to live by the principles that he held. And I really honor and I'm moved by those choices. I'm looking at the time. I didn't want to let you go, though, without. Uh, I want to ask you just a little bit, and I was hoping to get to this earlier in the call, a little bit more about your personal story. I don't think someone like you is kind of born awake, right? I mean, I guess you are. I know. I look there. I remember my son, and I meet some of these young people now. I'm like, whoa, they know something. That soul is old, and I could see that in you. But how did you come to this work? How did you come to this vocation and this sense of purpose?
Yeah, I started my career working at NASA, and I just was freaked out by the data I was seeing one day, and I asked my boss if I could go work on climate change. And so I changed directions, and I would say I really at the time I really didn't understand what we were up against. I thought that like we could yeah I could be like, hey, I'm here from NASA, we have a problem, let me tell you about it, let's fix it. And then I realized very quickly that the problem wasn't that people didn't know, the problem was that they did know. And if the problem is that they do know, then you're not going to change anything by bringing knowledge or accumulating or disseminating more knowledge. It's fundamentally a political problem, and a hearts and minds problem is the only way we're going to solve a political problem. And so I would say my journey to where I am today has been a series of things that didn't work and me trying something else. Like maybe if I'm a scientist, oh, maybe if I work for a big nonprofit and I can change things from there, oh, maybe, and I'm still learning. I try to figure out what doesn't work and stop doing that thing and lean into trying something.
That's a huge step. Because many of us just keep doing what doesn't work. So congratulations. Now, were you a scientist at NASA?
Yeah, so my training is as an ecologist. So I was doing observations of Earth from space in the science department, looking at the carbon cycle, and I was a terrestrial microbial ecologist by training, in fact, and that was sort of a path I was on that it I was jolted off of, because I saw the Arctic sea ice data in 2002, which is kind of funny now because now if you look at 2002 Arctic sea ice data, you don't see anything because there was such a big decline in 2012, I believe, that the scale had to change of the
Wow.
charts that were used, and it's just continued to decline since then. But I worked at NASA, and we talked about how planets that had polar ice caps just worked so fundamentally different from planets that didn't have them. And I realized we were heading in a very scary direction. But just realizing that is, like doesn't tell you how to fix it. So that's where I say I've a lot. I've had a lot of trial and error. Um,
I,
and I
it takes courage.
I'm still on that path.
Yes, yes. Um, I wanted to ask, do you read fiction?
I do. I read a lot.
I, uh, I recently read N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy. It's a sci-fi book. She's a black woman. It got all the sci-fi awards, and it's a really powerful take on, I think, on the climate crisis. It's about a lot more than that. What's that?
What is it called again?
The Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. Highly recommended. Ping me if you read it. Ping me
I
after. I'd be
will,
curious to see
and
what
I
you
will.
think. Yes, and I want I and Kaya, forgive me if it's not an appropriate question, but are you the child of migrants, or have you guys been here for multiple generations?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
My parents came in 1970. And my yeah, so my parents, when they were very young, were displaced by partition. So really experienced as a family of the brutality of colonialism. Um, and my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, was in jail for a couple of years as part of the Indian independence movement. Bengalis in general were very, very oppressed in the context of British colonialism. And so my parents were displaced when they were very young and moved to Kolkata, and grew up there. And they came here before I was born, in the 70s.
And how do migrant parents that have been through such oppression and such impact? Because I'm familiar with the a general migrant mindset. How do they take on the fact that you've decided to do this with your life, right, as opposed to be a NASA scientist?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely, there's a saying, I don't know if they say this in other immigrant cultures, but like in Indian culture, you hear a lot of like doctor, lawyer, failure are your three options.
Right.
And so like NASA scientist was like, okay, not as good as doctor or lawyer, but it was okay. And this is kind of like confusing and unknown maybe, but I do find it really interesting. I was just talking to my parents about this actually, that uh, so many movement leaders are Bengali. And I think that there is, like Sarita Gupta, who runs Jobs with Justice, Shrekar Chakraborty, who's the chief of staff for Alexander Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, I can go on and on, but it's like so many social justice leaders are Bengali, and I think that's probably cultural. And I think it's probably very related to having experienced such severe oppression and displacement, and having been raised with those stories, and also on like Rabindranath Tagore, who was a poet who won the Nobel Peace Prize. He's very, very famous in Bengali circles. Um, but being raised on those songs and that poetry that are really all about revolution and all about in very subtle ways, because you couldn't do it overtly, but are really fundamentally all about overthrowing colonialism. Um, and I think that there is something to that, how it has ended up that so many movement leaders are Bengali. But
That's powerful. I appreciate that. I get how that works. Just being Puerto Rican myself and seeing kind of, it's just interesting, this tiny little place with this huge kind of cultural footprint, right? Like, how do these things happen? And I think you hold a good theory, a good hypothesis here.
I don't know. I'm a
I,
feminist.
I have just a couple more questions before I let you go back to the hard business of building a movement. The You have a son, I believe, that will be turning 9, and I think a big question for people like us is, how do you contend with making our helping our children become aware of what is happening, take responsibility without absolutely terrifying them, right? uh, how do you mother in the climate crisis, right? I think you probably have some deep wisdom to share there.
I mean, I bring my kid everywhere. So I mean, like when he was 2 days old, I couldn't even walk. I was in a wheelchair and went to a rally. When he was 4 months old, we were out there, protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. He is so exposed to all of this, that he really understands what's going on in a way that most adults don't. He has met incredible movement leaders for a rising 9-year-old. And so I have never been a parent who hides things. So he comes to meetings and sits in the back in colors because I'm at community meetings all the time. I'm at, I really think that part of the loss of culture that we have is this divorcing of children from our spaces. And so I really believe in bringing, children and elders into our spaces. And I think it's really important. And one thing I talked to a child psychologist about this at some point who was saying that, for most kids, it's actually, they recommend not really talking about very hard things like climate change until like sixth grade, except for people who are involved in activism and movement, because that gives a support system. If a kid is taught about climate change at school, but then has no concept that there are people doing something about it every day, it's debilitating. But if they're
Right.
taught about climate change and they have a built-in support system of their family being at rallies, being at protests, doing something about it, they're able to internalize it at a much younger age. Um, I mean, frankly, I have
So,
no choice. It's not like I was like,
right.
oh, I have these 800 childcare options. Let me not bring my child to this meeting. Um, but I also really believe that because I believe so much of the core of our problem is a feeling of powerlessness. I love giving my kid a sense of power. So like I took a video of him once biking to school, and he asked me to take the video, and I sent it to the DC Department of Transportation, and I was like, I don't want to have to post this on Twitter, but like this is what it looks like with my 6-year-old biking to school because someone painted over the bike lane last week, and I got an immediate email back like, don't need to post this on social media. We will fix it immediately. So our kid then gets that sense of power, right? And how that happens, and that you can change things, and that we're not powerless. And that to me is more important, really, than any like facts that I could teach.
That is beautiful. Thank you for that. I will take that wisdom with me. Uh, the last thing that I want to ask you, two quick personal ones. I know I keep teasing you with this end, but I can't let you go without asking about the Green New Deal. Just because you're you and you do what you do. How are you feeling about it? What are your thoughts? Just a couple of a sentence or two on this big proposal.
Yeah, I'm really excited that we have an actual solution that is at the scale of the crisis we're facing, that is being discussed and on the table. And really grateful to Sunrise Movement, and everybody who got us to this point, of discussing it. I think for a lot of our members, there's a lot of angst about the process and how like it was so fast, and like, but is it going to have the content? Is it going to have everything I want to have in it? Like, are we really going to be able to center justice here, or is this going to get co-opted? So I understand the anxiety around it, but my orientation is excitement.
Great, thank you for that. So I there's two questions that I ask at the end of every podcast, and the first one is going to feel like a hard left turn, but I I am I've been interviewing women of color, centering that, and I'm interviewing these powerful women like yourself, in the shadow of the Me Too movement, right? And I'm a man, I'm a cisgender man, and I have ha- have made a deep personal commitment to atone, right, for my role in patriarchy, for the mistakes that I have made, for the harms that I have caused, and so when I'm in conversation with someone like you, I always like to ask, what should men do? What is the advice that you have for men that are swimming in this culture that not only privileges us, but really made so many of us harmful, dangerous, right? Unaware of our power and of the harm that we can cause. Whether that be harassment or sexual violence or simply the way we show up at meetings, right? Like, what advice or what wisdom do you have for the men that are listening?
I mean, part of it is in what you said. So I think the first step is educating to understand that you are swimming downstream and not everybody is. And I think that to me is like the most important thing for people to understand that, like, if you're swimming downstream, you don't even know it's easier for you, like, because you're not aware of the water. um, and you don't know that some people are swimming upstream. So I think just gaining that sense of awareness, and then, on a very practical level, offer to take notes.
Yes. Offer to take notes sometimes. I'm saying that again. Thank you for that. Thank you. Beautiful. I appreciate it. And I wish people could hear the big smile that you have as you say this. Uh, and then the last thing here is I like to do this, and it's a light, mild touch facilitation, right? But I like to invite my guests, somebody like you that's so conscious about the life that you're living, to imagine yourself, to try and picture yourself 20 years from now, right? And all of these things that you're working on out in the world, within yourself, right? These personal goals as kind of human being that you want to be, the kind of things that you want to see happen. Um, if I can invite you, you don't even have to tell me what that looks like, but if you could do a little time travel and imagine that a good bit of that has been achieved. Of course, some of it won't be, right? There will be other stumbling blocks, other things, but like that the general direction has been attained, that you've gained some wisdom and you've had some achievements under your belt. Can you picture yourself?
Mhm.
Okay. So then if you could time travel back from there, what advice would you give yourself? Would that kind of 20 years older person give you today?
I guess keep experimenting.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And what advice would you give us, the people that like you, that listen to you, that appreciate your wisdom from that perspective?
I don't think it actually changes from that perspective. It's still
Yeah,
be a part of community, join something.
beautiful. Lovely. Thank you so much, Kea. I am so happy to be reconnected to you. I think there's some work together for us in the near future. I'm excited about that. I appreciate your heart, your passion, your honesty, the commitment, that smile that you bring to this work. So thank you for giving me a little bit of your time, giving us a little bit.
Massive thunderstorm here. Sorry. Thank you.
I climb at saying hello.
I don't know if you could hear it on your end, but it sounded.
Yeah, we did. We got it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been quite beautiful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gibrán.